The sound of breaking glass cut through the quiet house like a warning. Little Ethan froze, his small hands trembling, shards of glass scattered around his bare feet. His wide eyes filled with fear, as if the broken pieces were his fault for breathing. Before he could even take a step back, Vanessa's sharp hand gripped his arm so hard it left red marks. Her face twisted with anger. "Do you know how expensive that was?" she hissed, shaking him. "You useless boy, always in the way." Ethan whimpered. His lip quivered, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around the large patio, searching for someone, anyone, to protect him. He was only 7, too small to fight back, too scared to move. That was when Grace appeared. She had been carrying a basket of laundry past the hall when the sound of the glass drew her in. She stopped cold as she saw Vanessa's hand digging into Ethan's tiny arm. "Please, ma'am," Grace said softly, her voice calm but firm. "Let the boy go. He's just a child." Vanessa's head snapped toward her, anger flashing in her eyes. For a moment, no one moved. The sunlight from the glass doors reflected across the polished marble floor, catching the tears that had started to fall from Ethan's eyes. Grace set the laundry basket down slowly, her heart tightening at the sight of the child shaking in silence. She had seen that look before, the one that comes when fear steals a child's voice. Ethan tried to pull his arm free, but Vanessa's fingers only dug deeper. "I said let him go," Grace repeated, this time louder, her voice trembling but strong enough to echo across the room. Vanessa's jaw dropped in disbelief. "You dare to talk to me like that?" she snapped. "You're a maid, nothing more. Don't tell me how to raise this boy." Grace's eyes lowered, but she didn't move away. "You're hurting him," she said quietly. "He didn't mean to break it. It was an accident." Vanessa released Ethan's arm but pointed a shaking finger toward him. "Accident or not, he has to learn. This house isn't a playground. If he can't behave, then maybe he doesn't deserve to live here at all." Ethan's small body flinched. Grace instinctively stepped in front of him, her arms slightly open, shielding him from Vanessa's rage. "Please, ma'am," she whispered, "don't speak like that in front of him." The air thickened with silence. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but inside, the mansion felt like a storm waiting to break. And at that exact moment, unseen by both women, the heavy front door clicked open. Matthew Carter, the billionaire who owned the house, stepped inside. He had returned from his trip 3 days early, hoping to surprise his family, maybe even find peace after weeks of business meetings and endless pressure. But the first sound that greeted him was the breaking of glass, followed by shouting. He paused, his briefcase still in hand, and listened. From the hallway, he could hear Vanessa's voice, sharp and cold, and then a softer one, Grace's. He walked closer, his footsteps silent against the marble floor. When he reached the patio, the sight before him froze him where he stood. Ethan was crying quietly, clinging to Grace's apron, while Vanessa stood over them, her face twisted in anger. For a second, Matthew thought he was dreaming. His fiancée, the woman he was supposed to marry in 2 months, had her arm raised as if ready to strike again. Grace stood between them, calm and still, her body slightly shaking but her eyes steady. "Vanessa," Matthew said finally, his voice low. The sound of his tone made everyone freeze. Vanessa turned around quickly, her expression changing from fury to shock. "Matthew," she stammered, "you're home early." He didn't answer. His eyes went from her face to Ethan's small red arm, then to the broken glass scattered around their feet. Slowly, he set down his briefcase. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could carry. "What happened here?" he asked quietly. Vanessa forced a smile. "It was an accident. Ethan dropped the glass, and I was only trying to teach him not to be careless." Matthew stepped closer, his eyes now on Grace, who kept her head slightly bowed but held Ethan close. "Is that true?" he asked her gently. Grace hesitated. Her heart pounded, but she spoke honestly. "He dropped it by mistake, sir. But he's been punished enough already." Vanessa's fake smile vanished. "Punished enough? He's spoiled, Matthew. He needs discipline. If you don't start being strict with him, he'll grow up weak." Matthew's eyes darkened. "By hurting him?" Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. Grace reached for a napkin on the table and began picking up the glass shards one by one. Ethan hid his face against her side, holding onto her apron like it was the only safe place left in the world. Matthew knelt down slowly beside them. His hand brushed Ethan's shoulder, and the boy flinched. That tiny movement cut deeper than any wound. He turned his eyes toward Vanessa, and for the first time, she could see anger in them, not the kind that came from pride, but from pain. "Go upstairs," he said coldly. "Matthew, please. Now." Vanessa hesitated, then turned sharply and stormed out of the room, her heels echoing across the floor. The house went silent again. Only Ethan's quiet sobs filled the space. Matthew looked at Grace. "Thank you," he said softly. Grace shook her head. "You don't have to thank me, sir. I just couldn't stand by and watch." He nodded slowly, but his thoughts were far away. As he lifted Ethan into his arms, the boy buried his face in his father's chest, but still held Grace's hand. That small gesture told Matthew everything he hadn't wanted to see. His son didn't feel safe with the woman he planned to marry. He felt safe with the maid. Grace watched as Matthew carried Ethan upstairs. Her hands trembled as she wiped the last of the glass away. The room still smelled faintly of the spilled wine. The sunlight had shifted, falling across the floor in soft lines, but the tension hadn't left the air. When she finally stood up, her heart was heavy. She didn't know what Matthew would do next, or if her standing up for Ethan would cost her the only job she had. All she knew was that she couldn't have done otherwise. Upstairs, Matthew laid Ethan on his bed and sat beside him. The boy's eyes were half closed, tired from crying. "Daddy," he whispered, "please don't let her come back." Matthew froze. His throat felt tight. "She won't, son," he said quietly. "She won't." When he came back downstairs, Grace was already gone from the patio, but the laundry basket was still there. He stood there for a long time, looking at it, realizing that everything he thought he understood about love and safety had just shattered, just like that glass on the floor. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment was only the beginning of everything that was about to change. The house felt quieter than usual the next morning, as if the walls themselves were still trying to recover from what had happened. Grace moved through the hallway carefully, her steps soft against the polished tiles. She tried to focus on her chores, folding Ethan's clothes, dusting the living room shelves, polishing the silver trays. But her mind kept replaying the image of the boy crying, his tiny hand gripping hers for safety. Every time she blinked, she could still see the red mark around his arm. From upstairs came the faint sound of footsteps. Matthew had been in his study since dawn. No one had heard Vanessa's voice since last night. She had locked herself in the guest room after the argument, and Grace guessed she was packing. A part of her hoped she was right. Grace finished tidying the living room and looked out the large window that overlooked the garden. The sunlight fell softly over the flowers she had watered every morning. She wanted to breathe in that peace, but something in her chest felt heavy, like a stone she couldn't move. Working here had always been quiet. She was careful, respectful, invisible when needed. But yesterday changed everything. She wasn't supposed to speak to Vanessa that way. Not in this house. "Grace," a voice called. She turned quickly. It was Matthew, standing at the bottom of the staircase, dressed in a simple gray shirt and black pants. There was no trace of the usual coldness on his face, just something unreadable. "Yes, sir," she said softly, holding her hands together. "Can I have a word?" Her heart skipped. She followed him into the study, where the morning light poured through the tall windows. The air smelled of old books and faint cologne. Matthew walked to the edge of his desk and stopped, his back half turned to her. "About yesterday," he began. Grace lowered her head. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disrespect Miss Vanessa. I only wanted to protect the boy." Matthew's eyes shifted toward her. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. "If anything, I owe you an apology." Grace's head lifted slightly, her eyes uncertain. "An apology, sir?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I should have seen it sooner. The way she treated him, the fear in his eyes whenever she spoke. I thought she just needed time to adjust. But last night made me realize I've been blind." Grace said nothing. Her heart softened a little, hearing him speak like that. Matthew had always been polite but distant, the kind of man who spoke more to his phone than to people. "I ended the engagement this morning," he said, his voice steady but low. Grace's eyes widened slightly. "You did?" "She's gone," he said simply. "I don't want someone who can't love my child." The room went silent for a moment. Grace wanted to say something comforting, but words didn't seem enough. Finally, she said softly, "Ethan will be happy to hear that, sir." He nodded. "He's still shaken. He didn't eat breakfast. Could you stay close to him today?" "Of course, sir," she replied. When Grace left the study, her chest felt lighter, yet her thoughts tangled. She didn't want to celebrate Vanessa's departure, but she couldn't deny the small peace that came with it. Ethan was sitting on the floor of his room when she entered, building tiny towers with his toy blocks. The morning light fell on his soft blonde hair. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and smiled faintly. "Good morning, Ethan," she said gently. He nodded but didn't speak. Grace knelt beside him. "You're quiet today." He placed another block on the tower, then whispered, "Did Daddy make her go away?" Grace hesitated. "She's gone for now," she said carefully. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Ethan nodded again, his eyes focused on the tower. "Thank you for helping me," he murmured. Grace smiled, brushing a bit of dust from his hair. "You're safe now, little one. That's all that matters." Hours passed slowly. The mansion, usually filled with noise and movement, stayed quiet. Matthew came down for lunch, but barely spoke. He spent most of the afternoon on phone calls, his tone serious, his mind far away. Grace watched him from the dining hall as she cleared the plates. There was something different about him today, less polished, more human. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Grace stood by the kitchen window watching the orange sky fade into blue. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, a soft blanket covering him. She was about to head upstairs when she heard footsteps behind her. "Grace!" Matthew's voice came again, lower this time. She turned. He looked tired, his sleeves rolled up, his tie loose around his neck. "Would you like some tea?" she asked quietly. He gave a faint smile. "You always think of everyone else first." Grace smiled back, though shyly. "It's my job, sir." "No," he said gently. "It's who you are." For a moment, their eyes met. The silence felt warm, not heavy like before. Matthew looked away first, clearing his throat. "I'll be going to Houston tomorrow morning. There are some business matters to settle." "Yes, sir." "I'll be gone a few days, but if Ethan needs anything, call me directly. I've told the guards and the driver to follow your instructions while I'm away." Grace blinked, surprised. "You trust me with all that?" "I do," he said simply. "You've earned it." Her chest tightened with emotion she couldn't name. "Thank you, sir. I'll take good care of him." When Matthew left the kitchen, Grace leaned against the counter for a moment, letting out a long breath. She didn't realize she had been holding it. That night, she tucked Ethan into bed and turned off the light. The house finally felt calm again. She stayed up a while longer in her small room behind the laundry area, writing in her old notebook. Her handwriting was careful and small, her words filled with dreams of someday owning a little cafe where people could come in from the cold and feel safe. She called it Warm Hearth. She had no idea that tomorrow, that very same notebook would change everything. In the early morning hours, the ringing of the doorbell shattered the quiet. Grace stirred awake and quickly slipped on her robe. The guards were at the gate, arguing with someone. She peeked out the window and froze. Flashing lights, cameras, voices shouting. Reporters. She rushed downstairs just as the guards tried to close the gates. But it was too late. A crowd had already gathered, snapping photos, yelling questions. Grace Johnson, how long have you been seeing Mr. Carter? Did you really destroy his engagement? Are you using his son to win his heart? Grace stood frozen at the doorway, her mind spinning. The cameras flashed in her face. Someone shouted her name again. Another voice yelled Vanessa's name. Then it hit her Vanessa had done this. Upstairs, Ethan started crying from the noise. Grace ran to get him, clutching him tightly in her arms. The boy's tears soaked her shoulder. She whispered softly, "It's okay, baby. Don't be scared." But her hands were trembling, and her heart beat with a silent question she didn't want to ask. What if this was only the beginning of something much worse? The morning sun rose over the mansion, but peace never came with it. Reporters still stood by the gates, shouting questions every time someone walked past the windows. Grace stayed inside with Ethan, drawing the curtains close to protect him from the flashing lights outside. The boy sat on the couch with his favorite blanket clutched tight to his chest, his eyes wide and scared. "It's okay, sweetheart," Grace whispered, brushing his hair gently. "They'll go soon. Just stay with me." She tried to keep her voice calm, but inside her chest felt tight, heavy with fear. She had never been in a situation like this before. She wasn't the kind of person people wrote about, and she didn't want to be. She only wanted to work, to protect Ethan, and to live quietly. Down the hall, the phone kept ringing. It hadn't stopped all morning. When Grace finally gathered the courage to answer it, she heard Matthew's voice. "Grace," he said sharply, "are you and Ethan safe?" She felt a wave of relief hearing him. "We are, sir. But the reporters won't leave. They keep asking questions about me. I don't understand what's happening." "I do," Matthew said. His voice dropped lower, more controlled. "Vanessa went to the media. She told them you destroyed our engagement and manipulated Ethan to make me turn against her." Grace froze, her hand gripping the phone tightly. She said that? Yes. She sold her story to every tabloid that would listen. The photos, the rumors, it's all over the news. Grace's stomach turned. "Sir, please, I know," Matthew interrupted softly. "I know you didn't. But right now you need to stay calm. Don't speak to anyone. Don't open the door. I'll handle this." "But the things they're saying," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're calling me names. They say I'm a liar. They say I trapped you." Matthew's voice softened. "Listen to me, Grace. My name can survive lies, but yours is too pure to be dragged through this. I'm going to fix it, I promise." Before she could respond, Ethan began to cry again. She quickly said goodbye and hung up, kneeling beside the boy. His tears came fast. "Why are they shouting about you, Grace?" he asked, his small voice shaking. She hugged him tightly. "Because some people don't know the truth," she said gently. "But that's okay. We do." Hours passed, but the noise outside didn't fade. By afternoon, the mansion felt like a cage. Grace tried to distract Ethan with stories and cookies, but her hands shook every time she glanced at her phone. She refused to turn on the TV. She didn't want to see her face plastered beside lies. That night, when Ethan finally fell asleep, Grace went to her small room and sat on her bed, her notebook open on her lap. The pages were filled with drawings of her cafe tables, coffee cups, flowers by the window, and the words "warm hearth" written in neat letters at the top. She stared at it quietly, feeling tears sting her eyes. She whispered to herself, "I don't need to be seen. I just want peace." Then, she closed the notebook and slipped it under her pillow. The next morning, Matthew returned. His car pulled up at the back gate to avoid the press. When he walked in, Grace was in the kitchen making breakfast. Her hands were shaking as she poured milk into a cup. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "They'll follow you." "I don't care," Matthew replied. "I needed to see you both." Ethan ran from the living room and hugged his father tightly. Matthew knelt down, wrapping his arms around the boy. "It's okay now, son. I'm here." Then he looked up at Grace. "We'll talk after breakfast." The meal was quiet, though Ethan smiled a little seeing his father again. Grace stayed mostly silent, afraid of saying the wrong thing. When Matthew finally stood up, he motioned for her to follow him into the study. Once the door closed, he took a deep breath. "Grace, I know this is hard. I didn't think Vanessa would go this far." Grace lowered her eyes. "She just wants to destroy me, sir. But please, don't fight her because of me. I don't want your name dragged into this more than it already is." He frowned. "You shouldn't have to suffer alone. I can call a press conference. I can tell everyone what really happened." Grace shook her head quickly. "No, sir, please don't. If you defend me publicly, it will only make things worse. They'll twist your words. They'll say I'm making you do it. Let them talk. It'll fade away." Matthew looked at her in disbelief. "You're being humiliated, Grace. Don't you care?" Her voice was quiet, almost breaking. "My name doesn't matter, sir. Ethan does. As long as he's safe, I can bear the rest." Those words hit him like a weight. Her calmness, her dignity, her ability to think beyond herself, it humbled him. That night, after everyone went to bed, Matthew couldn't sleep. The mansion was dark, except for a small light glowing under a door near the laundry area. Curious, he walked closer. The door was slightly open. Inside, Grace was asleep at her desk, her head resting on her arms, the small notebook open before her. The light from the small lamp touched the page, showing drawings of a little cafe filled with smiles and warmth. Matthew stepped closer and read the title on the page, "Warm Hearth." Underneath, Grace had written, "A place where everyone feels at home." He stood there for a long moment, silent. He realized she wasn't just kind. She had a heart full of dreams. A woman with a vision built not on wealth, but on love. He quietly placed a blanket over her shoulders before leaving the room. The next day, Grace woke up to find her blanket neatly tucked around her. She smiled faintly, though she didn't know who had done it. She returned to her chores, pretending everything was normal, even as whispers about the scandal spread across the city. Meanwhile, Matthew was already planning something. He had been invited to speak at a charity gala in Houston later that week. Vanessa would be there too. She had promised the media an exclusive statement. But Matthew had something else in mind. When the night of the gala came, the city lights shimmered across the glass towers of Houston. The ballroom glowed with elegance, filled with reporters, guests, and the soft hum of violins. Vanessa arrived first, dazzling in a red dress, smiling for the cameras like nothing had happened. Matthew entered moments later, calm but serious. His speech was scheduled after Vanessa's. As Vanessa took the stage, she began her usual charm, twisting lies into polished words. But before she could finish, a voice called out from the crowd. "That's not true." Everyone turned. A young reporter named Megan Price stepped forward. Her face was determined. "I have proof," she said. "Proof that Vanessa Carter paid tabloids to spread false stories about Grace Johnson." Gasps filled the room. The projector behind her lit up with emails, payment receipts, and documents for all to see. The audience began to whisper, cameras flashing rapidly. Vanessa's face turned pale. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. But the truth was already out. Matthew stood up from his table, walked to the stage, and took the microphone. The room went silent. "Grace Johnson is not a liar," he said firmly. "She is the reason my son is alive, the reason I found my own heart again. If you ever want to see what real strength looks like, look at her." The crowd applauded softly, some even standing. Cameras turned away from Vanessa, focusing on Matthew. Vanessa's smile vanished as security guided her out. And in that moment, the world began to see who Grace truly was. The next few days felt like waking from a long nightmare. The scandal began to fade as the truth spread. Reporters stopped waiting outside the mansion. The newspapers that once printed lies about Grace now published apologies. The world moved on. But for Grace, the silence that followed was the greatest relief of all. She stayed quiet through it all, refusing interviews, avoiding the spotlight. Every morning, she still woke early, made breakfast, and cared for Ethan like before. But inside, something had changed. The fear that had lived in her heart for weeks was gone, replaced by calm. One morning, as she was flipping pancakes in the kitchen, Ethan came running in. "Grace, look," he said, waving a newspaper. She wiped her hands and knelt down beside him. On the front page was a photo from the gala, Matthew standing proudly, the headline reading, "Truth Wins, the maid who protected the billionaire's son." Grace stared at it in silence. "Where did you get this?" she asked softly. "Daddy showed it to me," Ethan said, his eyes bright. "He said people finally know you're good." Grace smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter what they think, sweetheart. What matters is that we're safe." But inside, she felt something warm bloom in her chest. For once, she wasn't being judged by her job or her skin or her silence. People had seen her heart, and that was enough. Later that day, Matthew came into the kitchen. He wasn't dressed like his usual self in a suit, but in a simple blue shirt with his sleeves rolled up. Grace almost didn't recognize him. He looked lighter. "Morning, Grace," he said. "Good morning, sir," she replied, keeping her tone formal as always. He hesitated. "You can call me Matthew," he said softly. Grace froze for a moment, unsure if she heard him right. "I don't think I should, sir." "I think you should," he said with a small smile. "After everything you've done for my son, and for me, I don't want to be just sir anymore." Her cheeks warmed. She looked down at the pancakes to hide her expression. "As you wish, Matthew." He smiled faintly, watching her work. The smell of butter and syrup filled the kitchen, and for a moment, it felt like home. After breakfast, Ethan ran off to play in the garden, leaving Grace and Matthew alone. The quiet between them wasn't awkward anymore. It felt peaceful. "Grace," Matthew said suddenly, his voice low, "I saw your notebook." Her hands stopped mid-motion. "My notebook?" "Yes. The one with the drawings of a cafe. Warm hearth." Grace's breath caught. "You saw that?" "I did. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't stop thinking about it." He paused, his eyes soft. "It's beautiful, Grace. That dream you have. It's exactly what the world needs." She gave a shy smile. "It's just a dream, sir. Something to keep me hopeful when things get hard." "It doesn't have to stay a dream," he said gently. Grace frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I want to help you make it real," Matthew said. "Not because I pity you, but because you deserve it. You've given so much of yourself to others. Let me help you build something that's yours." She shook her head quickly. "No, sir, please. I don't want charity. If I ever open that cafe, I want to do it with my own savings, with my own hands." Matthew looked at her quietly for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Then I'll wait until you're ready. But when that day comes, I'll be there as your first customer." For the first time in a long while, Grace laughed softly. "I'll hold you to that, Matthew." Weeks passed, and slowly life returned to normal. Vanessa disappeared from the public eye. The mansion grew quieter, warmer. Matthew worked fewer hours, spending more time at home. Sometimes, Grace would catch him watching her and Ethan from a distance, smiling in a way she'd never seen before, not proud, just peaceful. Then, one afternoon, Grace came to him, holding an envelope. "I wanted you to see this," she said, placing it gently on his desk. He opened it and found a small lease agreement. "You rented a place?" "Yes," she said nervously. "It's small, but it's enough for the cafe. I've been saving for years. My cousin in Austin found the spot for me. It's perfect." Matthew smiled slowly. "You really did it." Her eyes sparkled. "I'm going to call it Warm Hearth, just like in my drawings." "I'd like to visit," he said quietly. "You'll always be welcome, sir," she said, then quickly corrected herself. "I mean, Matthew." 3 months later, the cafe opened in a quiet corner of Austin. The sign above the door read Warm Hearth Cafe in soft gold letters. Inside, the walls were painted cream and light brown, filled with sunlight and the smell of coffee and fresh bread. There were small drawings hung up along one wall. Ethan's drawings, little hearts, stick figures, and the word family scribbled in crayon. Grace's friends from her old neighborhood helped her run it. The customers who came in said it felt like stepping into peace itself. Grace spent her days serving tea, baking pastries, and listening to people's stories. She was finally living her dream, not as someone's maid, but as someone who built something from love. One quiet evening, after closing, Grace sat at one of the tables, tired but happy. The cafe lights glowed softly around her. She looked at the empty chairs and smiled. Then she heard the doorbell ring. "Sorry, we're closed," she called gently. "I was hoping you'd make an exception," a familiar voice said. Grace looked up, startled. Matthew stood in the doorway, dressed simply, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. Ethan was asleep in his arms, his little head resting on his father's shoulder. "Matthew," she whispered, standing up. He walked closer and placed Ethan gently on one of the couches. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Then Matthew turned back to her. "He insisted we come. He missed you." Grace smiled tenderly, her eyes soft. "And you?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze. "I missed you too." The silence between them stretched, full of words neither had said. Finally, Matthew took a step closer. "Grace," he said softly, "you taught me what love really means. Not power, not money, but kindness that heals broken people. You made this house, this life, warm again." Her eyes filled with tears. "I only did what was right, sir." He smiled gently. "Then what's right is what I want to spend the rest of my life with." Grace's hands trembled slightly. "Are you saying?" "Yes," he whispered, his voice tender. "Will you let me walk beside you, not as your boss, but as your equal?" Her tears fell, but she smiled through them. "Yes, Matthew, I will." He took her hands and kissed her forehead. At that moment, Ethan stirred and mumbled softly in his sleep, "Mama Grace." Grace gasped quietly, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. Matthew smiled, his eyes glistening. In that little cafe, filled with warmth and love, everything finally came full circle. Outside, the evening lights of Austin glowed softly through the window, and for the first time in years, Grace, Matthew, and Ethan were truly home. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that love isn't always found in the loud places of life. It often lives in silence, in the quiet acts of kindness that no one notices. Matthew had everything that money could buy, but it took one humble woman's courage to show him what a true home really means. Grace didn't save the world. She simply protected one child, spoke one truth, and stood by it no matter the cost. And that was enough to change everything. Her story teaches us that real strength doesn't come from wealth or power, but from compassion, honesty, and love that asks for nothing in return. So, dear viewers, tell us, what did you learn from this story? Would you have done what Grace did if you were in her shoes? And do you believe kindness still has the power to change hearts like hers did? Comment below where in the world you are watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it so others can feel this message too. And if you want more emotional stories like this, type "more stories" in the comments, and you'll be the first to get the next one. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter where life takes you, keep a little warmth in your heart, because that's where real wealth begins.